Hi there, Emily Midgett here with you today on the Pinkfresh Studio YouTube channel, and I have some inspiration for you today using some of the new holiday products from the September 2022 release from Pinkfresh Studio. I'm going to be using the Festive Leaves stencil and die set with 2 different shades of ink, and then we're going to do some watercoloring over the top of those 2 shades of ink. I'm also going to use the Noel hot foil and dies, the Lush Vines hot foil plate, and then the Ornaments stamp set. This is a new stamp set, and it's got a beautiful image, and then it's also got a bunch of really wonderful sentiments that are great for your holiday cards. Now I also have some Holbein watercolors and then Fabriano Artistico cold press watercolor paper. So the basis for today's technique for our card is going to be using the Festive Leaves stencil set. Now, I like to try to get as much mileage out of my supplies as I possibly can, and so one of the ways that I like to do this, it's kind of like faux no-line coloring. We're not using a stamped image, we're using the stencil image. This Festive Leaves is a stencil set. There's no coordinating stamp to go with it. It is a layered stencil and die set. So what we're going to do some very light ink blending with the 2 different shades of ink, the Fresh Pear and the, I think it's Coral Reef. And we're inking all 4 of the layering stencils using just those 2 shades of ink, and those are going to be our base layer. I did layer them on a sheet of Fabriano Artistico cold press watercolor paper, and because I layered it on the watercolor paper, and because the ink, the Pinkfresh Studio ink, is dye based, it's water based, so I can watercolor over the top of it without having to worry about any issues with watercoloring over the top of it. It blends very smoothly with the watercolors. So I basically did the ink blending with the stencils just so that I would get a basic outline of the shape that the dies will eventually cut out. So I'm using my Holbein watercolors with my paintbrush. I have 2 different shades of green that I'm using. I'm laying down the lighter shade of green first, and then while that first layer is still damp, it's still fairly wet. You can see that it's kind of shiny. I am taking that darker shade of green. It's almost kind of a dark blackish green. It's a very, very dark shade of green. And I'm adding some of that dark green to that wet area. Now what this does, when you add wet watercolor to wet watercolor paper, what it does is it will bloom. That's the technical term, is it will bloom. So the wet watercolor paper, when that watercolor touches that watercolor paper, that wet watercolor paper, it kind of spreads and it creates this beautiful kind of organic, very artistic watercolor look. And it's a bit different than my normal, very kind of meticulous and detailed and controlled watercolor. This is a little bit more loose and kind of just a little bit more fun and kind of whimsical almost. So I am with the leaves. I like to think of leaves as each half of the leaf is its own, almost like a flower petal. So each side of the leaf gets treated on its own. It's like 2 flower petals that have kind of been bunched up next to each other. So if I have a dark shadow on the left side of that leaf, the right side of that leaf, of that section of leaf, will be light. So the left side is dark, right side is light. Then the other section of that leaf, left side is dark, right side is light. I go in a pattern, left, right, on those 2 sections of that leaf. We want to create the contrast between the light area on the left and the darker area on the right, so that those 2 sections have contrast and it helps to create the shape. It helps to give that leaf a little bit of definition and highlight and shadow. So now I'm going back in after my first layer has dried, and I'm adding just a few little details. You can see that I colored all of the foliage in this set, in this stencil set, the same color. And now we're going to go in and we're going to add some kind of, it's like a magenta kind of coral color to the berries. And we're using that blooming technique. I'm dampening the entire area of the berry just with clean water and my damp paintbrush, and then I'm going in and I'm picking up a little bit of color on my paintbrush and just dropping it into one section of that berry and allowing that watercolor to bloom on that damp area of the berry. So with these berries there's two berries that are kind of clustered together, I am working with the berry that's tucked behind first, because I want that to be darker. Because it is tucked behind, I want to make sure that that is a little bit darker and more intense color-wise, so that it's shadowed. So now once that darker berry behind has dried, I go back in. You have to wait until it's completely dry, just like with regular no-line coloring. You wait until it's completely dry, and then you can go back in and add your color to the berry that's on the top. And what coloring that berry behind first does is it allows you to see the contrast of the dark versus the light. So it shows you where you need to have that light edge of that berry on top to give the definition to those two distinct berries. So you can see I'm kind of moving the color around with my paintbrush. I clean my brush off frequently on my damp stamp chamois and move the color around so that I can create that kind of round shape. So now that we have finished the watercoloring portion, I am using this handy dandy one-step die. It cuts out all of these images in one fell swoop. I love these dies from Pinkfresh. They are so ingenious and so great for mass producing your Christmas cards. So I have cut out all of the images from that Festive Leaves stencil set that we've watercolored. And now I also have the Noel hot foil. I used some matte gold foil and hot foiled that Noel hot foil and then cut it out with the coordinating dies. Now I have used the Lush Vines hot foil plate, and I have run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 with the embossing mat, which is kind of a springy rubber mat, and it creates this beautiful embossed texture on the background of this card without having to use the hot foil machine at all. So it's another great way to get some extra mileage out of your hot foil plates, is you can use them as almost embossing folders. So now I am using some gold sparkle embossing powder to emboss a greeting from the Ornaments stamp set. I've just embossed it on some white cardstock with gold sparkle embossing powder, and then I'm going to trim it down. I am going to leave a little bit of extra on the end, and then we'll trim that at an angle. So next, for behind the large Noel sentiment, I'm going to create a frame using the Nesting Diamonds dies. They're just some basic essentials dies that are really great to have. You can use them with the coordinating hot foil plates, or you can use them, as I've done here, by nesting them together and then creating your own frames. You can use them in all different kinds of widths. So now I have this white frame. I'm going to pop that up on my Lush Vines embossed background. I'm going to use some foam tape and pop that frame up to add a little bit of extra dimension. I do like to, when I'm trying to make sure that things go straight on my card front, I like to add a little bit of liquid adhesive to my foam tape strips, and that just gives me a little bit of wiggle room to be able to move that piece around on my card front, just to make sure that it is really straight. It gives me those few extra seconds so that I can kind of move things around. So now that we have the base, the background of our card finished, I'm going to add the Noel sentiment with a double layer of foam tape. This card has a lot of texture, but it also has a lot of white space on it. And so I like to combat that white space being kind of boring by adding lots of different elements of texture and height to my card. And one of the ways that I do that is I use double layers of foam tape for certain elements, just so that they have that little extra height and are a little bit more interesting. So now I am trimming at an angle the end of that sentiment strip that we heat emboss with the gold sparkle embossing powder, and I added a little strip of gold sparkle cardstock behind it, just matting it so that it's got that sparkly edge. And now it's time to arrange my watercolor die cuts. Now these, I'm not going to show you adding these with foam tape and everything. You can figure that out. But I do arrange them in a group of, three separate little entities, three separate little groupings, to try to kind of create a visual triangle on the front of my card. I do have some overhang with some of the larger foliage pieces, but you can mail this easily in a 5x7 envelope. There's no reason why this wouldn't fit nicely into a 5x7 envelope. But I do use lots of foam tape. I also use some liquid adhesive to adhere all of those different elements to the card front. Lots of shine and shimmer on this card front. And then we're going to add one final little bit of some matte gold pearls from the Pinkfresh Essentials line. These are really great. The different metallic accents, none of them are the same. None of them are super shiny gold. None of them are super sparkly gold. They're all different metallic gold accents. But I think that they work beautifully together, and those pops of red just are so festive. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you will try watercoloring over your stenciled images. I think that is such a fun technique and such a great way to get extra use out of your standalone stencils. So if you liked the video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the thumbs up, and if you'd like to see some more content from us in the future. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.